Hi, it's Greg again. I'm here with Scott, Party Foul. We're here to talk about an unusual sort of topic that I'm very familiar with, and it's called 1 year in and ready to quit. So it's kind of the idea that, for me anyways, and for a lot of people that I know, their experience with learning Warmachine was kind of different, where you got to a certain point and you would get very frustrated. You would learn the game, you think you knew everything that was needed to know, and you found yourself still not able to crack through and win a lot of games and enjoy yourself. You were frustrated. You're at that point of frustration. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about why 1 year. Well, it's kind of an arbitrary number, but it's a very real benchmark. 1 year is based on a casual gamer's experience of playing 1 or 2 games a week. It certainly was my experience, where I got to that point where I was extremely frustrated and I was ready to smash all my models and get angry all the time. And I was very angry in my games. I was frustrated. I wanted to see some results, some success, and I wasn't seeing that. I didn't know why. It takes into account the growth that's necessary to get to the point that you're ready to smash all your toy soldiers and go back to whatever hobby you came from. So it could be, if you play intensely, it could be less time than that. If you play 1 game a week or something, it could be more than that. But I think it's something that happens to most people when they play Warmachine. Because personally, I think Warmachine is different than other miniature games. It's not quite as casual. It's more competitive. So I'm going to go through a number of reasons why I think players get into it. I think that it attracts a more mature crowd because it tends to be a more complicated game in terms of the interactions of rules than some other games. I mean, there's some other great games like Malifaux or something that has a great complexity level too. But compared to, some of the Games Workshop products, it's a much more in-depth, complicated game. It's a much more balanced, competitive system, so it tends to attract more mature gamers. And I think because of that, it has a sort of chess club type of mentality in a way, where, and that's not meant to denigrate either chess clubs or Warmachine. It's meant to sort of say that Warmachine has a community that is dedicated to having its participants learn, develop, grow, and succeed, and also compete with each other. And that can cause a certain amount of stress or a certain amount of frustration if you're very caught up in the idea of how you rank within your community. Personally, I think that's a mistake that you can get into. It's certainly at certain points in my development as a Warmachine player, it's a mistake that I've got into as a mindset. You have to look at it as a growth experience and what you can get out of each game, what learning experience you can get out of each game. I think it's also different because it's a competitive one. It has very live scenarios, and you have to be playing the scenario and the game every turn of your game. It's not like some other games where, in particular, I'm thinking Games Workshop games, where the scenario is really an afterthought in some ways. So to talk about the phases of Warmachine growth. So where you start from and what hopefully your end goal is. And I've sort of identified for myself 4 stages. I like to think that I'm at stage number 3, but maybe it's different from day to day. So when you come in, you're the recruit, and you have most likely a clumsy and haphazard arrangement of your models when you're playing. You're not really that concerned with placement. You're just sort of pushing stuff around the table without a whole lot of thought about placement and orientation. The recruit gets surprised a lot, but the good thing is the recruit doesn't seem to mind that much because everything's new and exciting, and everything is like a rapid-fire learning experience. So the recruit has a good time losing, is basically the upshot of it. When you get to the next stage, the novice wants to win games. The novice wants to demonstrate that he's gained some understanding and competency within Warmachine. He wants to display that in his results, his win results. He might play some tournaments some of the time. Just as a note, I once played a recruit at a tournament, like somebody who had just got into the game and didn't even really understand how to allocate focus to his jacks. That was an interesting experience. It's not something I would recommend to a recruit, but but it was good experience for him, I think. It was definitely a very positive, optimistic sort of individual. But a novice, we're talking about the novice, has been to some tournaments. In my experience, when I was a novice, I got assassinated all the time. I still hadn't mastered the ability to try to keep my caster safe. I was always trying to get the most out of my caster. I looked at the focus as a resource that needed to be spent, otherwise it was wasted. So in my experience, novices gets assassinated all the time, especially by experienced players. They make order of operations and order of activation mistakes all the time. They get very frustrated by that. They try not to lose on scenario, but they don't actively pursue it as a win option. They know it's there, they know they need to stop their opponent from winning, but they don't usually develop a plan to try to win on scenario. And in that respect, they don't have a clear conception of their win scenario, their win strategy, what their progression is going to be. Like in terms of the game, whether they're going to focus on scenario first or focus on attrition. They're not sure exactly which models of the opponents they should try to eliminate. They don't really know when to assassinate. They don't know if it's a good opportunity to assassinate or a bad opportunity to assassinate. And in that respect, they also take what is offered to them by their opponent, which models are within their threat range. The novice tends to, if a model is in charge range, well, I'm going to charge it because that's going to give me the opportunity to remove models, not realize that they may be playing the game the way their opponent wants them to play it. So that's a novice. And the novice can be a very frustrating stage for a player to go through because, like I said, you've been playing a while, you want to get some results, and you're not getting them. So the third stage is the veteran. The veteran, I would say, goes to tournaments regularly. Or at least plays regularly. I kind of think that to kind of get to that veteran status, you need to play some tournaments, you need to play a little more outside your basement meta or your local hobby store meta to really achieve that. They play consistent casters and lists, and they start playing to win on scenario, and they have a strategy. They have a progression that they want to get through to win the game, and they decide that when they put their models down. When they're placing their models, they have a specific idea what they want to accomplish with those models. The veteran is also surprised a lot less, assassinated a lot less, doesn't make as many order of operation or order of activation mistakes, and if they do, they don't tend to get tilted by it. They just take it in stride and move forward. The veteran will also demonstrate a certain flexibility that will surprise their opponents. So if it looks like they're pursuing a particular strategy, and they can foresee that strategy is not going to be successful, they will be flexible and change their strategy. And they will also have set up their models and their game plan in a way that they can adapt in that flexible manner. And the last stage, the stage that I think everybody should try to achieve, is the master. And I don't think the master is necessarily not about mastering the game, like the individual nuances of the game. I think that the master will have mastered that, but it's more about an internal, personal mastery. And the master can evaluate situations very clearly. They can see a turn or two or more ahead. They can see how the game is going to play out. They take calculated risks. They know how to casually manipulate their opponents. And this is something that I occasionally do unintentionally. I don't do it intentionally a lot of times, but I will have played it. I'll be playing my turn, and then I'll be getting to the end, and I'll be like, "Oh man, I should have feeded." And I realize in my head that I shouldn't have feeded. It would have mitigated a certain number of casualties, but that the optimum time to feed will be the turn after, and that will tease my opponent into thinking that I'm weak or that I'm vulnerable, and they will commit themselves to something. And I will know that, okay, I'm going to counter, and I'm going to feat, and then it's going to put them in a very difficult situation. That's the sort of subtle manipulation. A master will do that intentionally. They will be like, this opponent is going to underestimate me. I'm going to say, oh man, I should have feated. This is so bad. Something like that. I mean, subtle. You're not going to do it as like grandiose or like as flamboyantly as that, but that type of subtle things. Or even when it comes down to list picking, your opponent, if you think your opponent's going to play a certain list, you might say like, oh, I see you've played Runes of War twice today already. So that maybe gets them into a certain mindset of like, oh, he expects me to take my other list. But maybe you're like trying to mentally get him to take runes because you're saying, oh, you've taken it twice already. You don't want to get yourself list locked, so you're going to play your other list. That's what you're saying. So your opponent might pick the list that you want him to pick. That type of thing. The master doesn't tilt, doesn't get emotional about the game, plays very casually and politely, doesn't get overly emotionally involved. And most importantly, I think, a master takes responsibilities for errors that he makes and gives credit to his opponent for successful strategies and for good play. That I think is the true sign of a master. Somebody who can accept responsibility for their errors and say, I think I played a very good game, but I could have done this better. So those are the 4 stages: recruit, novice, veteran, master. There's a number of common reactions to the painful process of warmachine growth. One of those is caster jumping. So you play a couple games with a caster, you lose your games, and you're like, oh, this caster sucks, I'm going to move on to something else. As opposed to sticking to that caster, trying to find something that would work for you, as opposed to just dumping him and moving on. Or faction jumping. That can be quite common, where you play a faction for a couple of months. And like I say, I know there's people that are very good at the game, and they might say they faction jump, but they don't. They play a faction for 6 months a year, and then they move to another faction, and they play that one for 6 months a year, and then they move on. That's not faction jumping. Faction jumping is like you play it for a month or two, and you're like, Khador sucks, I'm going to go play Legion because they're broken. And you play Legion because you think you're going to win more of your games. Another sign that you're going through painful warmachine growth is that you change your lists all the time. You can't seem to settle on a list. It's very important that when you're playing a list that you tweak it a little bit and you don't play a game against trolls and be like, oh, damn it, this list sucks. What I need is this, this, and this, which are all certain things that do well against trolls, but you're not thinking about what you want this list to fight. You're going to have to fight probably several factions at least in your pairings. So don't do that. Don't change your list all the time. Tweak it. Know what you want your list to fight. Know what you want it to accomplish, and just subtly tweak it after you play a few games. Okay, finally, I'm going to talk about signs you're at the 1 year mark or very close to it. So this is when you know that you're at that point, and then I'm going to hopefully tell you how to deal with that. So the first sign is that you're constantly complaining about Crix, Signar, Legion, etc., how unbroken and unbeatable they are, Epic Haley, Ravagors, blah, blah, blah. That's a very clear sign that you're at the 1 year and ready to quit point. Second point is game rage. Yeah, what's that?
Put your hands down.
My hands down? Sorry, I'm just gesticulating. So game rage. If you're angry when you're playing the game, that's also an excellent sign that you're at that 1 year point. And hopefully I can tell you how to deal with that. That's a very difficult thing to deal with. Third thing is frantic list making. All that list changing and stuff like that. Very clear sign you're at the 1 year and ready to quit point. Argue how particular rules don't make sense or are illogical, etc. And it's always amusing to hear people try to rationalize how this game rule that is obviously designed to balance the game is somehow doesn't make any physical sense in the real world. You're playing a game with little toys and stuff like that. It doesn't have to make physical sense. Say things like, well, there's always the hobby aspect. I've heard that a couple times, and that's a sign that you're ready to quit. So what can you do when you're on the ledge and you're ready to jump? First thing that I would recommend, and I've seen people do it and do it very successfully, is take a break. Take a week off. Do something else. Get some perspective. Step away. Okay? That's important. If you're getting angry all the time when you're playing and you're not having fun, there's a reason for that. It's not because the game sucks or because it's broken or because your buddy plays Legion and he's evil and nasty. The problem is you. And that's the hard thing to accept. The problem is internal. The problem is you. But if you need a week or 2 or a month, I've known people that have done that, and they've come back and they've gained some perspective, and they're a much better player because of it, and they've learned a lot. Second thing is, try playing smaller games. Some people, because of their community, their store, their basement meta or something like that, they get pushed up to larger point level games before they're ready to take it on. Try to find some people that are willing to play 35, 25 battle box games, whatever it is that you can feel comfortable playing in and don't feel overwhelmed by the number of options that you need to make. Third thing is listen to veteran players. Players that aren't going to necessarily tell you about individual nuances of the game, but are going to tell you about ways that you can play better, practices that you can have, habits that you can have to play the game in a more efficient way so that you can focus on the things that you can do better, the learning experiences that you can gain. Fourth is admit to yourself that you're still learning, even a year after playing. And that's very hard to accept when you've been playing, say you've been playing miniature tabletop games for 20 years or something. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to warmachine, I can play that for a year, I'm going to be competent, I'm going to win at least 50% of my games, and you're still losing a bunch of your games. You have to admit to yourself, after a year, in this game, you are still learning. You can play this game for 3 years, you're still learning. 5 years, you're still learning. It's also a game that's developing in sense of the way the meta shifts and stuff like that, what is played, where you are, what sort of tournament you're playing. It can be very different. So accept that you're learning. Fifth is, after a game, step back and evaluate what you could have done better. Use your opponent as a sounding board. Say, dude, that was a very awkward game for me. I felt like I made some mistakes, but could you tell me what you think I did wrong? And listen, because he's going to have probably the clearest perspective of what he felt you did wrong. And lastly, when you're playing, remind yourself that it's supposed to be fun and that the win-lose result is not the important factor. It's not the ultimate goal. We all like to win. We all want to win. We all want to place in tournaments and stuff like that. It's the learning that you gain and the challenges that you can identify. That's what matters. And if you at least have one takeaway, one learning experience from a game, then it was a personal win. So find out what those learning experiences can be, because that can enrich the game for you. So don't quit. Step back. Take an eye to yourself. Say, how can I be a better player? How can I be a better person? And that sounds really lame. Sounds like a kitten poster or something like that. But I have kind of found that Warmachine has made me more introspective about myself, and not only made me a better player of games, but a better person as well. So there you go. Don't quit. Give it another shot.